What's up, guys? I'm going to break down how I made a Star Wars Boba Fett teaser with a minimal crew, one-day shoot, one location, with visual effects on a low budget. I'm going to talk about why I did it, how I finished it in 3 months, how I made the suit, and all for under $5K. At the time when I made this, it was 2015. It was right at the height of when The Force Awakens was about to come out. Star Wars was like at an all-time high. The trailer had just come out, and people were like stoked on new Star Wars. And they had announced a series of spin-off movies that they were going to do in the Star Wars universe that were going to be called the Anthology films. And at the time they had announced Rogue One, and they had Gareth Edwards attached to that. And there were talks about what the other two would be. People thought maybe it'd be Han Solo. People thought maybe it'd be Boba Fett. There was rumors maybe one would be about Yoda. And then it was confirmed that they were going to do a Boba Fett one, and Josh Trank was attached to direct that. But the rumors were that they were going to do a Boba Fett origin story, that it was going to be about like how Boba Fett became Boba Fett, how he came up. And for me, I love Boba Fett. I wanted to see Boba Fett like in his prime, action-packed, like kicking butt. I didn't want to see him like coming up. Like we saw some of him as a kid in the prequels, and I just wanted to see like a cool, awesome Boba Fett movie. So then the idea came about of like, well, what if he survived the Sarlacc pit and we picked up right after that? What if we go out and shoot like a Boba Fett teaser that just shows Boba Fett surviving the Sarlacc pit, which basically would just give like an open book to what Boba Fett could be. Like he survives it and now he can go on adventures. And at this time, Josh Trank had fallen off the project, and it was like, it was kind of just like blue sky at that moment. And really the idea of this film was like, we should shoot this in a way where it looks like a post-credits scene. Like you could almost put this at the end of The Force Awakens to like tease this Boba Fett movie. That was kind of the idea. Not like a full-blown short, but just the concept of like Boba Fett surviving the Sarlacc pit so that he could go on his next awesome adventure. The tricky part about that was like, well, how long was Boba Fett in the Sarlacc pit? And Force Awakens is like 30 years after Return of the Jedi, so like could he be stuck in the pit for that long? But then there was the line that C-3PO said that
as you are slowly digested over 1,000 years.
You're slowly digested for over 1,000 years. And that like brought up this interesting idea of like, well, what if this is like almost a Jonah and the whale type of story where Boba Fett was trapped in the belly of the Sarlacc pit in like a prison sentence for all this time. And he was like being preserved because he was going to be digested for 1,000 years. So like in a way he's living this like suffering life down in the belly of this beast. And this was in like May, and The Force Awakens was going to come out in December. So it was like, we need to move fast so that we can launch this before the movie comes out. Then immediately the thing became like, well, how are we going to do Boba Fett? Like, how are we going to do the suit? Some ideas were like, maybe we can reach out, because there's a lot of people that already have the suit that are like fully built, custom with awesome paint jobs. Maybe we can just grab somebody and they can come out and shoot it. But then there's a lot of logistical things about that, trying to get somebody to come be part of the shoot, and we're trying to just do this like very small. Then another idea was like, well, what if we get like a legitimate Boba Fett suit? And there's some great people that do like really legitimate screen accurate Boba Fett costumes, but that was going to be kind of expensive, like probably $5,000 to $10,000 just to get like a real suit. So then it was like, well, maybe we could just like get a cheaper suit and then like paint it to look really good. And that's ultimately what ended up happening. So I found this suit online. It was like a deluxe Halloween costume kind of suit, but it was still like made out of plastic and stuff. So we went out there to the location in the real environment and did a screen test. Any angles that we were going to shoot in the actual short, just really wanted to like scrutinize it, get extreme close-ups, even though we might not show that, and just see like what the suit looked like on camera. And it looked pretty bad. Like it did not hold up. But you could see what needed to be done in order to make it look real. For the first time ever, I learned how to airbrush. So I went to one of the hobby stores and bought an airbrush and some acrylic paints and some masking, and like very quickly learned how to airbrush and like the different techniques with masking and stuff to get like the multi-layered look so that, you know, parts of the paint looks like it's chipped off and you're seeing the metal underneath. And like the whole time I'm looking at screen images of the Return of the Jedi Boba Fett to make sure that like all the nicks and dents and everything are accurate. And the shoes or the boots, I ended up finding a shoe company that happens to build, like they make regular shoes, but then in one part of their website they had like Boba Fett replica shoes. So they make custom shoes, so they were able to make these ones that look like the ones from the film. And then once we got that, then we just had to add like the metal iron toe pieces with the spikes spikes on them, which was just like a piece of metal from Home Depot and like some wooden dowels that were like shaped. And then the suit needed to be like custom fit to whoever was going to be wearing it. And we had a friend of ours, was an actor. We tried it on and it just didn't fit and look right. Boba Fett has like a very specific stature and build. And we were sitting there kind of stumped of like, what are we going to do? We have to like get a bunch of people and fit them. And then was just like, Jason, why don't you try this on? And he put it on and it fit and it looked right. So it was like, all right, you're Boba Fett. So finishing the suit probably took a couple weeks. I want to say maybe like 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks to like finish it. That was probably the biggest part of pre-production. But once we had the suit, we were pretty much ready to go. And then with the location, like where can we film Dunes? I didn't even really know that Dunes existed in Southern California. So the first thing that I did obviously was see like where did they actually shoot Return of the Jedi? And when I looked it up, it was Buttercup Valley. I think it was on the edge of Arizona. We shot on this side of it, so it was in California, but we could drive there. It was like 4 hours to drive to. So we went and it looked great. The only problem was on the day that we went to scout it, there was people driving around ATVs and you could see like their tire tracks in the sand, like quite a bit of them. And it was like, shoot, that might be a little bit of a problem. We might just have to, you just have to find a patch where there's no tracks, and then anything in the background, basically, we'd probably just have to like clean it up in post or something. But luckily on the day that we got there, we were there super early. Nobody was driving around and we got some really great footage and there was no tracks anywhere. When we finally picked the location, I had reached out to a jib operator who was going to meet us out there super early in the morning to set up the jib so we could catch sunrise. And there was just 4 of us out there, including the jib operator and Jason, who was in the suit. And we just had very cheap equipment. So we had the jib, a generator, a doorway dolly and some track, and like a canopy tent because it was super hot out there. So we stayed in a hotel down the street the night before, woke up super early, got to the location, set the jib up for the first shot, which was going to be Boba Fett's footprints, and the camera is tracking across the sand leading up to Boba Fett to reveal him walking across the desert. So that was the first shot that we got. We had set up the jib right before sunset. Everything was ready to go. Went and made the tracks in the sand and then got our first shot. We got a couple additional shots just in case we wanted to change anything. By the time we finished that, the sun had risen up a little bit too much to where it was starting not to look good anymore. So then the whole rest of the day was basically just us waiting out in the desert for like 8 hours until the sun started going down so that we could get the rest of the shots, which were the shots like the close-up of the feet, Boba Fett kneeling down and like typing into his pad, and then the ship rising up. So we got the first shot of him walking through the desert as the sun was rising, waited all day until the sun started going down so that we could get those last couple shots, just so that the lighting looked good and it looked consistent.
Well, here we are in the middle of the desert. There's absolutely nothing around anywhere. I can't even hear a sound.
Once we shot it, obviously the editing was pretty straightforward. I mean, I already knew what the shots were and what the sequence of shots were going to be. We did shoot some extra shots just so I could see if there was like another way to cut it together, if it could look a little bit better. But it basically ended up being kind of the first idea, and it was just very simple. And then the visual effects. It was always known that there was at least going to be a visual effect shot with Boba Fett's ship, the Slave One, rising from the desert floor. And I had actually thought about maybe doing that practically, like trying to find a big enough model of the Slave One and shooting it with similar lighting and then compositing it in and doing the same painting techniques that I did on the suit. But it became very difficult to find a model that was big enough. Like if you're really going to shoot a miniature like that, like it needs to be pretty big. You can't, the ones that I found were too small. You couldn't get enough detail in it. So with doing it in 3D, you could zoom all the way into like a panel on the side and it would look good. So ultimately then the decision was made to do it in CG. With Star Wars, there's so many free available assets and stuff online. And I basically use the same technique that I used to paint the Boba Fett suit. I use that technique digitally to paint the ship. So it was like a lot of masking and layering and stuff to do metallic coats and paint coats and all that. So I had textured the ship and I had rendered it and I started compositing it and it just wasn't looking good and I couldn't get far enough away from it to like really tell, like to really judge it. I'm like, this is just like the one visual effects shot and I don't want to screw this up and I can't tell if this is looking good. So I reached out to a compositor, really great new compositor, brought him on and he composited it and he started doing a lot of the stuff that I kind of stopped doing, like adding some of like atmosphere and distance, because like realistically in the camera there really was no atmospherics or haze or any of that kind of stuff, but for some reason when you add that in it just really helped bring it to life. And then we did one additional shot at the very end. We felt like it just needed like a teaser, like a tag thing, so I did one more shot like after the title came in then the camera like whip pans over and you see the ship leaving Tatooine. So the ship was really like the one main visual effects shot that was always going to be, whether it was practical or it was going to be CGI. And then the other visual effect shot was the very opening shot, was meant to be sort of a combination of live action and CG. It was never meant to be like a full CG shot. We were actually going to shoot that opening shot with a drone. So it was meant to be that the drone would fly over the sand and rise up over the desert floor. And then once we hover over, you would see a CG version of the Sarlacc pit. But we had ordered a drone and something happened with the shipping of it. It was going to get delayed. It wasn't going to be there in time. So initially we wanted to test it when we went and did the suit test and tested the drone, but it wasn't there at that time. And then as it got closer to the shoot, it kept getting delayed and we realized like it wasn't even going to be available for the shoot. So then it was like, okay, this whole shot now has to be CG. And that was like very worrisome because to me, the biggest part of that wasn't necessarily the Sarlacc pit, because I feel like there's so much reference and there's those exact shots in Return of the Jedi that we could look at for reference. But the thing that was like scary to me was like when we're close up to the desert sand, how you get like all those ripples and like sand glistens in the sun. So that part of the CG needed to be realistic. And that's actually the first time that I picked up Octane Render, and I started using it because of the displacement in the sand. I use Cinema 4D for all my 3D stuff, and I was using just like the standard render, and displacement could be very render intensive. And so I picked up Octane just for the displacement. And the thing that sold me on it was like you could take a single polygon and put like a displacement texture of like a mountain range, and it would look fully like a mountain range just off of the displacement, and you could see it live. So it was like way faster with displacement. It looked good. So then I started thinking this is going to work really well for the desert sand, and I did some tests and it was looking really good. And that's actually when I first started using Octane, and from there I never turned back. It was that, but then also like getting the little tiny bits of like glistening sand as it flies across the top. And then as the camera goes up, it was sort of a mixture of like projection mapping, like creating a matte painting and like projecting textures onto different parts of the Sarlacc pit. And that shot I composited in After Effects. And it was really just those two visual effects shots. They probably took maybe a month. The full rest of the post-production time, that was probably the most time-consuming part of the process. And then actually the really tedious part came in, which was color grading. I actually did a lot of color grading in DaVinci because I wanted it to look like the original Star Wars. So I was looking at tons of screenshot references of what the tone of the sand looks like, what the color of the sky looked like, added a little bit of grain on top because it's supposed to look like it's 35 millimeter. We shot it digitally. That to me is like the biggest thing, is like I feel like every single Star Wars film that comes out like needs to mimic the look and feel of the original films. Everything should look the same, even down to the camera movements. Like it should look very smooth and controlled the way that it was shot then, because that to me is all part of the visual language of Star Wars, including all the design, like the stormtroopers, C-3PO, R2-D2, all that stuff has a very specific design and look. Same thing with the filmmaking technique and style. That has like a very distinct look. Then the very last part of it was that I did a little bit of Foley. Like when Boba Fett was walking on the sand and the music gets quiet, you can kind of hear his shoes, or you can hear like clinking on his suit. Like his suit was plastic in real life when we shot it in the desert, and we didn't shoot sound. Once I started mixing the music, that moment when all the sound goes down, I took a leather jacket and just kind of like twisted it. I took a belt that I had and kind of jingled the buckle to get some of those sounds. And like, I think I even took like some metal tools and was just messing with different clinking sounds and different ways to like rub leather and cloth together, and then adding maybe just like a little bit of like wind from the desert, and then the sound of the Slave One, because there was no real reference of like what it looks like when it, or what it sounds like when it takes off, or there was no sound that just existed for that. I think there was a mixture of like some helicopter, some like jet engines, but then the main one was like a NASA rocket taking off. So if you listen to it, it just sounds like very like distorted, like rippling, grumbling space shuttle taking off. And the music I had found from a section in the movie where whenever Boba Fett shows up, or Jango Fett in the prequels, there's a certain theme that shows up. So I used that for his moment because that made the most sense. The line of C-3PO saying that you're slowly digested for over 1,000 years, that was always like in the original concept, just to get the fact that that's why he's in the Sarlacc pit for so long. And then the next step was really just like posting this online and just hoping that we could get it out to as many people as possible so that people could see it. A bunch of my favorite like movie news websites Had no idea if anybody would share it. And then a few of them did. And once one really big one, I think it was IO9, once they shared it, then like all these other ones started picking it up. It started getting traction. And I had gotten meetings at different studios. We made a special trip and we went to Lucasfilm and got a cool tour around the place. And it's funny because I remember I went to this YouTube event probably a month before it was going to release. Kathleen Kennedy was there. I think J.J. Abrams and a bunch of the cast, they were talking about The Force Awakens and stuff. I brought my outline of this Boba Fett movie and like all my stuff for it. As I was leaving, everybody else had like parked in the parking lot and I had parked somewhere weird. And so I had to like go around to like the front, like on the main street. And as I'm walking, a group of people are coming out and there are these black SUVs. And I'm like looking and I'm like, whoa, I see Gwendolyn Christie, who played Captain Phasma, getting into one of the SUVs. And right next to her is Kathy Kennedy. And I'm in my mind thinking, should I stop and say? And I just walked right past her, like almost brushing shoulders. And I just kept going. So all in all, it was a really cool experience. It was a fun thing to work on. I think we posted it in around September. So it was about 3 months from the time we started to the time that we finished. And I think because it was such a small, short, contained piece, we weren't trying to make like a full short film. We were just making like a teaser, basically like a post-credits scene that you would see after a Star Wars movie or a Marvel film. We were able to pack it down and condense something that looked high-end and high quality for a very small amount of money, a very small amount of time to create. Whereas we could have thought of this whole idea of Boba Fett going into like Endor with the Ewoks and like having a battle or a cool action scene, and then you're just talking about crazy amount of work and time and money, and it would have taken forever to pull off. And this was something that the whole goal of this was, let's try to get this out before The Force Awakens and try to influence like what the Boba Fett film is going to be. This idea of these anthology films were pretty exciting. You could do standalone movies, and we just really wanted to make them like proper and really what we felt that a lot of fans were wanting to see, not wanting to see like a biopic or like an origin story of Boba Fett, but to see like him in his prime, like kicking butt. And so that was the whole point of this, is like, this is what the Boba Fett movie should be. And they never ended up making a standalone Boba Fett movie like that. They did do the Book of Boba Fett, which sort of went in a different direction, but they did say that Boba Fett survived the Sarlacc pit, so that is canon now. But yeah, it was a fun experience, and I think something like this is a great idea for filmmakers that want to make something. I think it's cool if you can take like a piece of IP and make something, you know, like here's kind of your spin on it. I just wanted to share some of the process and the breakdown of how we did something like this to maybe inspire other people, give you ideas for things you can do. If you enjoyed this, like the video or subscribe, leave a comment. Let me know what other kind of things you guys want to see, or if you have any questions about the process, I'll try to answer them in the comments. Anyways, until next time, later.